The war room of the Alliance flagship Eternal Light was filled with the sound of fear. Everyone could feel it in the air like a thick fog that made breathing hard. Commander Tae-ho stood at the center, looking at the huge holographic map that showed their galaxy. The map was covered in red dots, and each red dot meant another world lost to the enemy. Tae-ho was a Kalari, which meant his skin was blue like the ocean, and his eyes were large and golden. His people were known for being smart and good at talking to solve problems. But talking had not worked against the vast empire. The reptilian creatures did not want to talk, they only wanted to destroy and conquer. 3 long years had passed since the war began. 3 years of losing battle after battle. 3 years of watching beautiful worlds burn. The Kalari crystal cities that once sparkled like diamonds in space were now just floating debris. The Thrix hive worlds with their amazing technology lay empty and broken. Even the mighty Dracon, warrior clans had been crushed by the endless vast war machine. Click 7 buzzed nervously beside Tae-ho. The young Thrix had antennae that twitched when he was scared, and right now they were moving like crazy. His insect-like body was shaking as he looked at the battle reports. The numbers were terrible, and getting worse every day. Our forces are down to 30% strength, Commander Click 7 said in his clicking voice. We have lost the entire Outer Rim sector. The Vask are pushing deeper into core worlds every week. At this rate, we will be completely defeated in 6 months. Tae-ho closed his golden eyes and tried not to think about what defeat would mean. The Vask did not take prisoners. They did not make deals or show mercy. When they conquered a world, they killed everyone who fought back and made slaves of the rest. The few survivors who escaped told horrible stories of reptilian soldiers who enjoyed causing pain. The Kalari commander looked around the war room at the faces of his officers. There were Thrix, with their compound eyes reflecting fear. There were tall gray Zeltans, whose usually calm faces showed worry. There were even some Dracon warriors whose proud scales had lost their shine. Everyone knew they were losing. Everyone knew the end was coming soon. Sir, what about the humans? Click 7 asked quietly. Tae-ho almost laughed, but there was no humor left in him. Humans were the newest species to join the galactic community. They had been discovered only 50 years ago, living on a small blue planet called Earth. The first contact team had found them fighting wars with chemical explosives and metal bullets, while the rest of the galaxy used energy weapons and plasma shields. The humans had primitive technology and no experience with space combat. Their ships were built like flying fortresses covered in armor plating instead of the elegant energy shields that civilized species used. They still fought with solid projectiles that had been outdated for thousands of years in galactic terms, but they had answered the Alliance distress call when many other species had refused to help. Some human diplomat named Ambassador Park had promised that Earth would send military support. The Alliance had accepted, mainly because they were desperate for any help at all. How many ships are the humans sending? Tae-ho asked. Click 7 checked his datapad. Only about 200 vessels, Commander. They call them destroyers and cruisers, but our scouts report they are much smaller than our capital ships. Their weapons appear to be kinetic-based projectile systems rather than proper energy weapons. 200 small ships with primitive weapons against the vast empire that had thousands of advanced warships. With plasma cannons and shield technology, it would be like throwing pebbles at a mountain, but Tae-ho had to try something. The alternative was complete surrender and the end of everything his people had built over millennia. The bridge doors opened, and Captain Su-jin walked in. She was young for a Kalari officer with bright blue skin and determined golden eyes. She had been studying human culture since first contact and seemed excited about something unusual for these dark times. Commander, I have been reviewing the human tactical databases that Ambassador Park provided, Su-jin said. Her voice carried a strange note of hope that had been missing from Alliance communications for months. What did you find? Tai-Ho asked their military history. "Is very different from ours, sir. The humans have been fighting wars constantly for their entire recorded history. They have experience with ground combat, naval battles, air warfare, and even some space conflicts in their own solar system." Tai-Ho frowned. "So they fight a lot. That does not mean they can defeat the Vask. Our energy weapons are far superior to their projectile systems." But Commander Su-Jin continued, "Their tactics are completely different from anything in our databases. They do not fight at long range like civilized species. They get close to their enemies. They use surprise attacks, boarding actions, and something they call combined arms warfare. They even have soldiers who specialize in fighting inside buildings and underground tunnels." This information made no sense to Tai-Ho. The Kalari way of war was elegant and clean. Ships fought at maximum range using precise energy beams. Ground battles were formal affairs with clear lines and proper formations. The idea of fighting inside buildings or tunnels seemed barbaric and chaotic. Click 7 antennae were still twitching with nervousness. "Commander, the Vask fleet has been detected entering the Zephyr system. Our defensive forces there are requesting immediate reinforcement. If we lose Zephyr, the core worlds will be completely exposed." Tai-Ho looked at the holographic map again. The Zephyr system was the last major defensive position between the Vask Empire and the heart of Alliance space. If it fell, there would be nothing. To stop the reptilian forces from attacking the homeworlds of every Alliance species, including his own beautiful Kalaria, with its crystal cities and peaceful people. Send word to the human fleet, he decided. They wanted to help defend the Alliance. Now they will get their chance. "Tell Captain Min-Ho that we need his ships at Zephyr immediately." But Commander Su-Jin said, "What if their primitive weapons cannot penetrate Vask shields? What if they are destroyed in the first battle? Then we will have lost 200 small ships instead of our entire civilization," Tai-Ho replied. "But something in the human databases makes me curious. They have survived and grown strong on a world where they fight constantly. Maybe they know something about war that we have forgotten." As the orders went out to contact the human fleet, Tai-Ho stared at the red markers spreading across the galactic map. The Vask Empire had superior technology, better ships, and more soldiers. They had defeated every alliance, tactic and strategy. The war seemed hopeless. But deep in his mind, a small voice whispered that maybe desperation could succeed where careful planning had failed. Maybe these primitive humans with their crude weapons and strange tactics could find a way to hurt an enemy that seemed unbeatable. Maybe sometimes the best way to fight a civilized war was to be completely uncivilized. The communication system crackled to life as Captain Min-Ho's face appeared on the screen. The human looked different. From Alliance officers, his eyes were dark and hard, his face was stern, and behind him other humans moved with quick, efficient motions that spoke of constant readiness for battle. "Captain Min-Ho, this is Commander Tai-Ho of the Alliance Defense Force. We need your fleet at the Zephyr system immediately. The Vask are attacking our last major defensive position." The human smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed dangerous situations. "We have been waiting for this, Commander. Our ships are ready to jump. We will be at Zephyr in 12 hours after the transmission ended." Click. 7 looked worried. "Commander, what if this is a mistake? What if we are sending them to die for nothing?" Tai-Ho turned away from the holographic map. "For 3 years, we have fought the Vask using every civilized tactic we know. We have lost every major battle. Maybe it is time to try something uncivilized. Maybe it is time to see what happens when primitive humans meet advanced aliens in combat." The war room fell silent as everyone considered this possibility. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly in space, and somewhere among them the Vask Empire continued its relentless advance toward the heart of civilization. But now there was something new in the galaxy, something that had never existed before in the long history of interstellar warfare. Soon, the universe would discover what happened when desperate humans were given a chance to fight. The human fleet arrived at Zephyr System like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Lieutenant Su-Jin stood on the bridge of her cruiser watching the human ships drop out of hyperspace, and she could not believe what she was seeing. These were not the elegant curved vessels that Alliance species built. These looked like flying chunks of metal covered in weapons. Captain Min Ho's ships were dark gray and angular, with thick armor plating that made them look ancient and primitive. But there were so many weapons sticking out from every surface that Su-Jin had to count them twice. Each human destroyer had more gun barrels than most Alliance battleships had energy projectors. The human formation was strange too, instead of the neat, organized lines that civilized fleets used. The humans spread out in loose clusters that seemed almost random, but Su-Jin noticed that every ship had clear firing lanes and could support the others if attacked. It was crude, but effective. Captain Min Ho appeared on the communication screen, and Su-Jin got her first close look at a human commander. He was shorter than most Alliance species, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. His uniform was simple and practical, without the decorative elements that showed rank in civilized militaries. Lieutenant Su-Jin, I am Captain Min Ho of the Earth Defense Force. Min Ho said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, like a predator waiting to strike. We are ready to engage the enemy. Jin tried to be helpful. Welcome to Zephyr, Captain. The Vask fleet is approximately 3 hours away. They have superior numbers and firepower. Our tactical computers recommend maintaining maximum range and using coordinated energy volleys to penetrate. Their shields. Min Ho smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. Maximum range is not how humans fight, Lieutenant. We prefer to get close enough to see their faces when we kill them. Before Su-Jin could respond, the Vask attack fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. 47 sleek Predator-class cruisers with their characteristic green energy weapons already charging for battle. These were the ships that had destroyed Alliance fleets across the galaxy, the ships that had burned worlds and killed billions. The Vask formation was perfect as always, a precise geometric pattern that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure. Their energy shields shimmered like soap bubbles around each ship, and their plasma cannons began to glow with deadly light. But instead of forming up for a proper long-range battle, the human ships did something that made Su-Jin gasp in horror. They accelerated directly toward the Vask fleet at maximum speed. Captain Min Ho, "What are you doing?" she transmitted frantically. "You are flying straight into their weapons range. That is suicide." Min Ho's voice came back over the radio, calm and deadly. "All human ships, this is Incheon. Actual close to knife fighting range. Show them what happens when they mess with Earth." The space battle that followed broke every rule of civilized warfare that Su-Jin had ever learned. Instead of the careful long-range duel that should have happened, the humans charged straight into the Vask formation, like ancient cavalry. The Alliance had never seen anything like it. The Vask were so surprised by this insane tactic that their first volleys went wide. They were used to enemies who tried to stay as far away as possible, not maniacs who flew directly at them while firing everything they had. Human railguns began hammering the Vask ships with solid metal slugs moving at incredible speed. The Vask energy shields were designed to deflect plasma beams and laser weapons. They had never been tested against chunks of metal flying at 10% of light speed. Su-Jin watched in amazement as human kinetic rounds punched straight through Vask shields like they were not even there. The sophisticated alien defense systems simply could not adapt to such primitive weapons. The same technology that made Vask ships invulnerable to energy weapons made them helpless against old-fashioned bullets. Captain Min Ho destroyer Incheon rammed straight into the side of a Vask cruiser. The impact should have destroyed both ships, but the human vessel had been built like a fortress. Its armored hull crushed through the elegant Vask design, and human Marines poured through the breach. Sergeant Hai Young led the boarding party, and Su Jin could hear her voice over the human combat frequencies. Move, move, move. Get to the bridge and kill everything that moves. The idea of boarding an enemy ship during active combat was so insane that the Vask had no procedures for dealing with it. Their energy. Weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat, not fighting humans with shotguns and grenades in narrow corridors. Meanwhile, other human ships were using tactics that made no sense to anyone except themselves. Captain Johann Destroyer launched all its missiles at once, not at the Vask ships, but at empty space. The missiles exploded in a pattern that created a cloud of metal fragments that tore through Vask fighter squadrons like a storm. Private Nam Su fighter was badly damaged and losing power. Instead of retreating to safety like any sane pilot would do, he aimed his crippled ship at a group of Vask bombers and activated his self-destruct. The explosion took out 6 enemy fighters and cleared the way for human attack runs. Su Jin realized she was watching something completely new in the history of warfare. The humans did not fight like any civilized species. They fought like they wanted to die as long as they could take enemies with them. Every human seemed willing to sacrifice themselves for victory. The Vask tried to adapt to human tactics, but they could not understand an enemy that got stronger when things looked hopeless. When Vask ships took damage, they fell back to regroup. When human ships took damage, they attacked. Even more aggressively, Captain Min Ho had lost his main engines and half his weapons, but he continued firing at the Vask command ship with everything he had left. His voice echoed across all human frequencies. "This is for Earth, you scaly bastards." The human language was crude and violent compared to the elegant diplomatic speech that Alliance species used. But there was something in Min Ho's tone that made even the Vask hesitate. It was the sound of absolute determination, the sound of someone who would never give up no matter what. As the battle continued, Su Jin began to understand why the humans had survived on their violent world. They did not fight wars the way civilized species did, with careful planning and minimal losses. They fought wars the way animals fought for survival, with everything they had and no thought for anything except winning. The turning point came when Sergeant Hai Young Marines captured the bridge of the Vask command cruiser. The reptilian officers had never faced enemies who fought with knives and bare hands when their energy weapons ran out of power. The Vask were excellent soldiers, but they had never learned to brawl. Human Marines do not just kill enemies. Hai Young reported over the radio. "We make them afraid to fight us." Within 2 hours of contact, the Vask attack fleet was completely destroyed. Not a single enemy ship escaped to report back to their commanders. The humans had lost 8 ships and taken heavy casualties, but they had achieved something the Alliance had not managed in 3 years of warfare. Total victory against the Vask. Su Jin stared at the debris field where 47 enemy cruisers had been reduced to scrap metal and floating bodies. The humans had done the impossible. They had beaten a superior enemy using inferior weapons and insane tactics. Captain Min Ho appeared on her screen again. His ship was heavily damaged and his uniform was torn, but he was smiling like he had just enjoyed the best day of his life. "Lieutenant Su Jin, how did we do?" he asked. "You destroyed them all," Su Jin replied, still not quite believing it. "How did you know your tactics would work?" Min Ho shrugged. "We did not know. But on Earth we have a saying. It is better to die fighting than to live as slaves." The Vask wanted to make the galaxy kneel. We showed them that humans do not kneel to anyone as the human fleet began rescue operations. Su Jin realized that everything had changed. The Alliance had been fighting a civilized war against an uncivilized enemy and losing. Now they had allies who were even more uncivilized than the Vask, and that might be exactly what they needed. The war was far from over, but for the first time in 3 years there was hope, and that hope had a human face, covered in blood and smiling like a predator who had just tasted victory. News of the human victory at Zephyr spread across Alliance space faster than hyperspace communications. Commander Tae-ho sat in his quarters aboard the Eternal Light reading battle reports that seemed impossible. Every Alliance species had been fighting the Vask for 3 years without a single major victory. Now humans had destroyed an entire enemy fleet in 2 hours, click. 7 buzzed into the room carrying more reports from human ships scattered across the front lines, the insect-like. Thrix was no longer twitching with fear. Instead, his antennae were moving with excitement as he shared the incredible news. Commander, the humans have won another battle at Kepler Station. They destroyed 12 Vask destroyers and captured 3 more for study. And at Proxima Colony, human ground forces have pushed the Vask completely off. Planet, Tae-ho studied the tactical recordings with growing amazement. The humans fought like no species he had ever encountered. They seemed to enjoy being outnumbered and surrounded. When normal soldiers would retreat, human forces attacked even harder on the planet. Meridian Colonel Da-yun was showing the galaxy what human ground warfare looked like. The Vask had controlled the planet for 8 months using their superior plasma weapons and energy shields to dominate every battlefield. But Da-yun Marines used tactics that the reptilian forces could not understand or counter. The humans did not fight in neat formations like civilized armies. Instead, they appeared everywhere at once, crawling through sewers to attack supply convoys, hiding in civilian buildings to ambush patrols, using improvised explosives to destroy enemy equipment when regular weapons were not available. Sergeant Bo Ram led a squad of human soldiers through the ruins of Meridian City. The Vask had turned the beautiful metropolis into a fortress with energy barriers and automated defense systems. But Bo Ram and his Marines moved through the destruction like they belonged there. The Reptilian. Garrison Commander General Vex had sent messages to his superiors asking for reinforcement. He could not understand how primitive human soldiers were defeating his advanced troops. The humans seemed to appear out of nowhere, strike hard, and disappear. Before his forces could respond, these humans do not fight like soldiers. Vex reported to Vask High Command. They fight like wild animals. They use the rubble and ruins as weapons. They turn our own equipment against us. They seem to have no fear of death. What General Vex did not understand was that humans had been fighting wars in cities for thousands of years. They knew how to use buildings as cover, how to make weapons from scrap metal, how to survive when outnumbered and outgunned. It was knowledge written into their DNA after countless generations of warfare. Private Sang-ho had lost his entire family when the Vask first attacked Earth. The 19-year-old human had volunteered for the most dangerous missions, hoping to die fighting. But death seemed to avoid him no matter how many risks he took. Instead, he became one of the most effective soldiers in the human army. Sang-ho's specialty was infiltration and sabotage. He could slip past Vask sensors, move through enemy territory without being detected, and plant explosives that destroyed key targets. When captured, Vask officers were questioned. They all mentioned the same thing: a human ghost who appeared in their most secure facilities and disappeared after causing maximum damage. The Vask tried to adapt to human tactics, but every change they made seemed to make things worse. When they increased security patrols, the humans attacked the patrols. When they fortified their bases, the humans found new ways to infiltrate them. When they used energy shields, the humans switched to projectile weapons that went right through the barriers. Captain Johan was leading the assault on Vask Outpost 7, with only 30 Marines against 300 enemy soldiers. The mathematics of the battle were clear. The humans should have been destroyed in minutes. But Johan had studied Vask psychology and found their weakness. The reptilian species had evolved on a world where they were the apex predators. They were used to being the most dangerous thing in any environment. The idea that small furry mammals from Earth could be more vicious than 8-foot-tall reptiles with plasma rifles was something their minds could not accept. So when Johann Marines came screaming out of the underground tunnels covered in mud and blood and firing primitive shotguns, the Vask froze for just a moment. That moment was all the humans needed to close the distance and turn the battle into the kind of close-range brawl that humans excelled at. The human victory at Outpost 7 was not clean or elegant like Alliance battles. It was brutal and savage with hand-to-hand combat in the corridors and humans using knives when their ammunition ran out. But when the fighting ended, every Vask soldier was dead, and the humans had taken the base. Lieutenant Sujin was assigned to work with human forces as a liaison officer. The young Kalari had expected to find soldiers similar to Alliance troops, disciplined and professional. Instead, she found something that both impressed and terrified her. The humans were disciplined, but it was a different kind of discipline. They did not follow orders because regulations required it. They followed orders because they trusted their leaders completely and would die before letting their comrades down. It was loyalty based on shared danger rather than military protocol. More disturbing to Sujin was how quickly humans adapted to alien technology. Within weeks of their first encounters with Vask, weapons human engineers were reverse engineering captured equipment. They combined their primitive projectile systems with advanced alien energy tech to create hybrid weapons that were more effective than either technology alone. Sergeant Hai Young was testing one of these hybrid weapons, a railgun that fired projectiles wrapped in plasma energy. The weapon could punch through any known armor, and the plasma coating caused massive secondary damage. It was the kind of innovation that should have taken years to develop, but humans had built it in a month. The psychological impact of human tactics was spreading throughout Vask forces. Captured enemy communications showed that reptilian soldiers were becoming afraid to leave their bases. They had started referring to humans as death spirits, and some Vask units were refusing orders to engage human forces, but the humans were just getting started. Captain Min Ho had been promoted to admiral after his victory at Zephyr, and he was planning operations that made even his own officers nervous. He wanted to take the war directly to Vask territory and show the enemy what happened when they attacked human allies. "We have been playing defense for too long," Min Ho told his staff. "The Vask think they can attack our friends, and we will just react to their moves. Time to show them that humans do not just defend. We hunt." The plan Min Ho presented was so aggressive that Alliance commanders thought he had gone insane. He wanted to use human ships to attack Vask supply lines deep in enemy territory, cutting off their forward bases from reinforcement and supply. It was exactly the kind of operation that had never worked against the superior Vask fleet. But Admiral Min Ho understood something that Alliance strategists did not. The Vask had been winning because they fought predictable enemies who used standard tactics. Humans were unpredictable and getting more dangerous every day as human forces prepared for their first offensive operations. Against Vask territory, the balance of power in the galaxy was shifting. The Alliance had spent 3 years learning to fear the Reptilian Empire. Now the Vask were learning to fear something even more dangerous, humans who had decided that the only good alien invader was a dead alien invader. The first human offensive against Vask territory began at dawn on the contested world of Rigel Prime. Admiral Min Ho had assembled the largest human fleet ever seen in one place. 200 warships filled with Marines who had been waiting months for a chance to take the fight to the enemy. Commander Tae Ho watched the human preparations from his flagship and marveled at the difference between human and Alliance military culture. When Alliance forces prepared for battle, there were careful briefings, detailed planning sessions, and extensive coordination meetings. When humans prepared for battle, there were weapons checks, ammunition counts, and what they called pep talks. Captain Sujin had been assigned to observe human tactics and report back to Alliance command. She listened as Admiral Min Ho addressed his fleet over the communication system. His words were simple and direct. Unlike the complex strategic discussions that Alliance officers preferred, Today we stop playing defense. Min Ho announced to his captains, "The Vask have been pushing us around for too long, thinking we will just react to whatever they do. Time to show these lizards what happens when you poke a sleeping bear." The human plan was typically insane by alliance. Standards. Instead of the careful, systematic approach that civilized species used, Min Ho intended to attack 12 different Vask positions simultaneously. His fleet would split into small groups and hit enemy bases across 3 star systems before the Reptilians could coordinate a response. Sergeant Bo Ram was leading the assault on Vask Supply Depot Gamma, a heavily fortified facility that provided ammunition and equipment to enemy forces throughout the sector. The depot was protected by energy shields, automated defense systems, and a garrison of elite Vask warriors. Any sane military commander would have required massive firepower and careful coordination to assault such a target. Bo Ram had 30 Marines and a plan that most Alliance officers would have called suicide. He intended to crash his transport ship directly into the depot and fight his way to the main reactor. The beauty of Bo Ram's plan was its simplicity. The Vask had prepared for every possible conventional attack, but they had never considered that humans might be crazy enough to use their own ship as a weapon. The transport vessel Busan penetrated the energy shields through pure kinetic impact, and Bo Ram Marines poured into the facility, inside the depot. Vask soldiers found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to thrive on chaos. Human Marines moved through the corridors like they had been born in combat, using their surroundings as weapons and showing absolutely no concern for their own safety private. Nam Su had become something of a legend among human forces. The young soldier seemed to have a talent for being in the right place at the right time with the right weapon. His specialty was turning Vask equipment against its makers using captured plasma rifles to destroy enemy positions at Supply Depot Gamma. Nam Su found himself alone in the main armory, surrounded by enough Vask weapons to equip an army. Instead of trying to hold the position, he began systematically overloading plasma, batteries, and energy cells. The resulting explosion destroyed the entire facility and created a fireball visible from orbit. Meanwhile, Captain Johan was leading a different kind of assault on the Vask communication hub at Vega Station. The facility was responsible for coordinating enemy fleet movements across the entire sector. If it could be destroyed, Vask forces would be unable to respond effectively to human attacks. Johan's approach was even more direct than Bo Ram. Instead of landing his Marines outside the facility, he used his destroyer main guns to blast a hole directly into the communication center. Then he personally led the assault through the breach. The Vask defenders were trained elite troops who should have been able to defeat a small human force, but they had never fought enemies who seemed to get more dangerous when they were wounded. Johan had taken plasma burns on both arms, but continued fighting with a determination that terrified even his allies. The battle for Vega Station lasted 6 hours and ended with complete human victory. The communication hub was destroyed. The Vask garrison was eliminated, and Johan Marines had captured enough enemy equipment to supply several human battalions. It was exactly the kind of impossible victory that was becoming routine for human forces. Across the 3 target systems, similar scenes were playing out. Human forces were attacking targets that should have been impregnable and winning through sheer audacity. Colonel Da Yun had captured a Vask fleet base by sneaking her Marines aboard enemy supply ships. Lieutenant Hai Young had destroyed an entire squadron of Vask fighters by ramming them with her damaged interceptor. But the most significant victory came at the Vask regional headquarters on Altair 4. General Jin Woo had been tasked with capturing the facility intact, so human intelligence could study enemy strategic plans. The operation required precision timing, perfect coordination, and a level of tactical skill that most Alliance officers thought humans lacked. Jin Woo proved them wrong by executing a textbook combined arms assault that would have impressed military academies across the galaxy. Human ships provided orbital bombardment, While Marines assaulted from 3 directions simultaneously, engineers demolished specific targets while leaving critical systems intact. The VASC commander, General Thrak, had been confident that his headquarters was impregnable. The facility was protected by the most advanced shields and weapons that the Reptilian Empire could provide. It should have withstood any assault long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Instead, General Thrak found himself trapped in his command bunker watching human soldiers systematically capture his base room by room. The humans moved with an efficiency that scared him more than their famous aggression. They knew exactly where to go and what to target, as if they had been planning this assault for years. When General Jin Woo finally reached the command center, he found General Thrak waiting with his personal guard. The Reptilian officer was 8 feet tall with scales that could stop small arms fire and plasma weapons that could cut through tank armor. But when Jinwu Marines burst through the door, Thrak did something that shocked everyone. He surrendered. General Thrak had been fighting for the VASC Empire for 30 years and had never retreated from any battle. But something about the humans had broken his will to fight. The way they kept coming, no matter how many were killed. The way they turned every setback into an opportunity for attack. The way they seemed to enjoy being outnumbered and outgunned. "You fight like demons, Jin Woo General," Thrak said as human soldiers secured the command center. "Your species should not exist. Nothing that small and weak should be able to defeat the VASC Empire General." Jin Woo smiled as he examined captured VASC strategic plans. "You made one mistake, General. You attacked our friends. That made it personal. And humans do not forgive personal insults." The capture of Altair. 4 marked the turning point in the war. For 3 years, the VASC Empire had been advancing steadily, conquering alliance worlds and pushing deeper into civilized space. Now, for the first time, they were losing territory to an enemy that seemed to get stronger with every battle. Admiral Min Ho reviewed the results of the offensive from his flagship and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 12. VASC facilities destroyed 6,000 enemy soldiers killed or captured, and enough alien technology captured to upgrade the entire human fleet, all at a cost of 43 human casualties. But Min Ho was already planning the next phase of operations. The humans had proven they could beat the VASC in direct combat. Now it was time to show the galaxy what happened when human forces went on the hunt. The war had changed. The Alliance was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory, and they had allies who understood that the only way to win a war was to make the enemy more afraid of you than you were of them. The VASC Empire made their greatest mistake when they decided to attack Earth directly. Supreme Commander Vex had been watching human forces tear through his military for 6 months and decided that the only way to stop them was to destroy their homeworld. If humans were eliminated as a species, the Alliance would collapse and victory would still be possible. The VASC fleet that jumped into the Sol system was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, 300 capital. Ships carrying enough firepower to crack planets accompanied by 1,000 smaller vessels filled with invasion troops. The Reptilian Empire had committed everything to this final battle. Admiral Jin Woo was commanding the home defense fleet from Luna Base. When the enemy arrived, he had been expecting this attack for months and had spent that time turning the human solar system into the most heavily defended location in known space. Every asteroid belt had been mined with explosives. Every major moon carried weapons platforms that could destroy battleships. But the real surprise was hidden on the far side of Earth. Moon construction sites that Alliance observers had thought were civilian projects were actually military facilities, on a scale that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans had been building for war since first contact, and now everyone would see the results. Captain Johann commanded one of the orbital defense platforms that ringed Earth atmosphere. His station carried more firepower than most Alliance dreadnoughts, and there were 50 more just like it. The humans had not been content to rely on their fleet for protection. They had turned their entire star system into a weapon. The Vask attack began with long-range bombardment as enemy ships attempted to destroy human defensive positions from a safe distance. But Admiral Jin Woo had learned from studying enemy tactics. He knew the reptilians preferred to fight at maximum range using their superior energy weapons. So the human response was typically insane. Every defensive platform in the system opened fire simultaneously, not at the Vask ships, but at carefully calculated points in space. The barrage created a cloud of metal fragments and plasma that made long-range combat impossible. The Vask would have to get close if they wanted to fight. Supreme Commander Vex realized he had been trapped. The humans had forced a close-range battle where their primitive kinetic weapons would be most effective. But he had come too far to retreat now. The survival of the Vask Empire depended on destroying Earth and its dangerous inhabitants. The battle that followed was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships emerged from hiding places throughout the solar system, behind the gas giant Jupiter, inside the asteroid belt. Even from the surface of Mars itself, where underground bases had been carved into the planet, Crust Sergeant Ha Young was commanding a squadron of fighters, launched from Titan Base. Her mission was to penetrate the Vask formation and attack their command ships directly. It was a suicide mission that would have terrified pilots from any other species, but Ha Young had volunteered because her brother had died defending Alliance civilians. The fight through the Vask fleet was a nightmare of plasma beams and exploding ships. Ha Young lost half her squadron in the first 10 minutes, but the survivors kept pushing deeper into enemy formation. There, small fighters were too fast and maneuverable for the big Vask guns to track effectively. When Ha Young finally reached the enemy flagship, she was flying a damaged fighter with no shields and only one working weapon, but she had a full load of nuclear missiles and a target that contained 3,000 Vask officers. The explosion that followed lit up space brighter than a small sun. Private Sang Ho had been assigned to one of the boarding parties that would assault Vask ships if they got close enough to Earth. The 20-year-old human had spent the last 6 months training for this moment, learning every detail of reptilian ship design and weapon systems. When a damaged Vask cruiser crash landed in the Pacific Ocean, Sang Ho was part of the Marine unit that stormed the wreckage. The reptilian survivors were trapped in their sinking ship with nowhere to run and no hope of rescue. They fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but humans had been cornered animals. For most of their evolutionary history, Sang Ho and his Marines moved through the flooded corridors of the alien ship like predators hunting prey. They used underwater combat techniques that no other species had ever developed, because no other species was crazy enough to fight inside a sinking spacecraft. The battle for Earth lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Vask invasion fleet. Not a single enemy ship escaped to report back to their empire. The humans had lost 30 vessels and taken heavy casualties, but they had achieved something that would echo throughout galactic history. They had made the Vask Empire afraid. Captain Su Jin was monitoring communications during the battle and heard something that chilled her to the bone. Vask officers were sending messages to their families saying goodbye. They knew they were going to die, and they knew that humanity would never forgive what they had tried to do. The psychological impact of the failed Earth invasion rippled through Vask territory faster than the news of military defeats. Entire enemy fleets began retreating from Alliance space without being attacked. Vask colonies started evacuating their populations to more distant worlds. But Admiral Jin Woo was not interested in letting them run. He had seen what the reptilians did to human civilians during their attacks on Alliance worlds. He had read reports of Vask soldiers torturing prisoners and destroying hospitals. Now it was time for justice. The human counteroffensive that followed the defense of Earth was unlike anything in military history. Instead of the careful, systematic advance that Alliance forces would have used, the humans launched simultaneous attacks on every Vask position within 100 light-years of their territory. Colonel Yoon led the assault on Vask Colony 7, a world that had been used as a staging area for attacks on human allies. The planet was defended by elite troops and protected by orbital weapons platforms that should have made invasion impossible. Yoon's solution was to land her Marines directly on top of the enemy positions using drop pods that fell from orbit like meteors. The Vask defenders found themselves fighting humans, who had literally fallen from the sky and seemed to be enjoying every minute of combat. The battle for Colony 7 lasted 3 days and ended with every Vask military installation destroyed. The human Marines showed no mercy to enemy soldiers, who had participated in attacks on Alliance civilians, but they protected Vask non-combatants and provided medical aid to wounded prisoners. It was this combination of ruthless efficiency and unexpected humanity that made human forces so terrifying to their enemies. The Vask could understand cruelty or mercy, but not both from the same soldiers. The humans seemed to switch between compassion and violence based on rules that no other species could predict. General Tai Min was planning the final assault on the Vask home system when intercepted. Enemy communications showed that the reptilian government was preparing to surrender. The empire that had dominated a third of the galaxy for over a century was ready to admit defeat after less than a year of fighting humans, but Admiral Jin Woo had different plans. The Vask had started this war by attacking innocent worlds. They had tried to destroy Earth and genocide the human species. Now they would learn what happened when someone made humanity angry. The message that Jin Woo sent to the Vask Emperor was simple and direct. Surrender unconditionally and face trial for war crimes, or we will come to your homeworld and end your species permanently. You have 72 hours to decide. Vask Emperor tried to negotiate offering territorial concessions and reparations in exchange for peace. But the humans were not interested in bargaining. They wanted complete victory and total justice for every crime the reptilian empire had committed. When the 72-hour deadline expired, human fleets jumped into the Vask home system carrying weapons that had been built specifically for this moment, planet killers that could crack worlds and orbital bombardment systems that could sterilize continents. The final phase of the war was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had become the most feared species in known space. The final battle of the war began when Admiral Jin Woo fleet arrived at the Vask homeworld of Scythia Prime. The planet was protected by the most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy, energy shields that could stop entire fleets' orbital weapons, platforms that could destroy moons, and a garrison of 1 million elite Vask warriors who had sworn to die before surrendering. But the humans had spent months preparing for this moment. Their ships carried weapons that combined human engineering with captured alien technology, planet cracker missiles that could penetrate any shield, kinetic bombardment systems that dropped tungsten rods from orbit with the force of nuclear weapons. And something new that made even human officers nervous, a Scythia defense grid activated as soon as human ships entered the system. Massive energy beams reached across space, trying to destroy the invading fleet before it could attack the homeworld. But Admiral Jin Woo had learned from every previous battle with the Vask. He knew their tactics better than they did. Instead of engaging the defensive platforms directly, the human fleet scattered into small groups and began hitting targets throughout the system. Supply depots, communication relays, repair facilities, mining stations. Everything that kept the Vask military machine running. Colonel Jae Sung was leading the assault on the primary orbital station that controlled the planet defenses. His mission was to capture the facility intact so human forces could use the Vask-owned weapons against them. It was the kind of precision operation that required perfect timing and flawless execution. The station was defended by 3,000 Vask Marines armed with the best weapons their empire could provide. They were elite soldiers who had trained their entire lives for combat, and they were fighting to protect their species' homeworld. But they had never faced enemies like human marines. Jae-sung boarding party came through the station hull, using cutting charges that created multiple breach points simultaneously. The Vask defenders found themselves fighting on 6 different fronts against enemies who seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Private Sang Ho had become a specialist in urban combat during the long campaign against Vask forces. He moved through the station corridors like a ghost, using his knowledge of alien architecture to appear behind enemy positions. The young human had learned to think like his reptilian enemies and use their own instincts against them. The battle for the orbital station lasted 12 hours and ended with complete human victory. Jae-sung Marines had not only captured the facility, they had turned its weapons against other Vask defensive positions. The homeworld shield grid began collapsing as human forces used captured systems to attack key nodes on the planet's surface. General Tae-min was preparing for the final assault. The capital city of New Scythia was home to 50 million Vask civilians and the government that had ordered attacks on Alliance worlds. It was protected by energy barriers, underground bunkers, and the last reserves of the Imperial military. The human plan for taking the city was typically brutal. Admiral Jin Wo-oh had offered one final chance for surrender, but the Vask Emperor had refused to abandon his people to human justice. Now there would be no mercy for those who had started the war. Tae-min Marines landed in the city center using drop pods that punched through the energy barriers like bullets. The Vask military had prepared for conventional invasion with clear battle lines and organized resistance. Instead, they got urban warfare specialists who turned every building into a fortress. Sergeant Bo Ram led his squad through the government district, hunting for Vask officials who had ordered attacks on human colonies. The fighting was house to house, room by room, with no quarter asked or given. The humans moved with mechanical efficiency that terrified even their allies. Captain Soo-jin was observing the final battle from a safe distance and could barely believe what she was seeing. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and primitive savagery that no other species could match. They used plasma weapons and kinetic rifles, but also knives and bare hands when ammunition ran low. The psychological impact on Vask defenders was devastating. They were fighting an enemy that seemed to enjoy combat and got more dangerous. When wounded, human Marines would continue attacking even after taking injuries that should have been fatal. Their determination was something the reptilian mind could not comprehend. Admiral Min Ho had been promoted to Supreme Commander of all human forces and was coordinating the final assault from his flagship. The battle was going exactly as planned, but he felt no satisfaction in the victory. The war had cost too much and taken too many good soldiers. When the Vask government finally surrendered, it was not to prevent military defeat. The city was already falling, and their forces were being systematically destroyed. They surrendered to prevent the complete extermination of their species because they finally understood what they were fighting. Humans were not just another military force. They were an entire civilization that had decided the Vask Empire needed to be eliminated. The same species that showed mercy to prisoners